Been waiting for you, darling.
The year was 1992 when Ralph Bakshi decided to give us Cool World, an animated horror fantasy film that was going to be R-rated and the perfect blend of live action and underground cartoon aesthetics. When they started off with the idea, they were hoping to get the next Who Framed Roger Rabbit, but instead, this movie somehow ended up becoming popular for the wrong reasons. It was one of the most notorious production disasters of the 90s. Chaotic rewrites, studio sabotage, bizarre marketing. Every box office don't happened with this movie, leaving the audience completely baffled and the box office numbers tanking severely. So you gotta wonder, what happened? So to understand what truly went down in Cool Down, we would have to look at the very beginning. And let me tell you, this bad movie did not start out as one at all. It was something very, very different. It was dark, violent, and something only Ralph Bakshi could come up with. In the late 90s, Bakshi was the man who dominated conversations when it came to animation. He had broken so many barriers with his films like Fritz the Cat, Heavy Traffic, and American Pop. All of these animated movies had the distinct anti-Disney vibe, and Bakshi was the guy who somehow managed to put socio-political angst, sex, and drugs into animated movies and still made it work. His work was raw and messy, but also brilliant. But when the 90s hit, Bakshi had not put out any film in almost a decade, so Cool World was going to be his much-needed comeback. Given how monumental this was going to be for him, the pitch of that movie had to be gripping and entertaining. So he suggested this R-rated animated and live-action horror movie that would have hypersexual and violent cartoons parading around in a world which shared the same aesthetics as Sin City. The main core of the show was about this cartoonist father taking care of his child, a doodle. It was disturbing, audacious, and in Bakshi's own words, this was not a kid's movie. As you can see, this original version was all about obsession, perversion, and of course, the consequences of playing God through art. To properly portray the troubled tone of the movie, the art style was supposed to be jagged, harsh, and grotesque. The humans were supposed to look more animated, effectively blurring the line between the real world and the illustrated world. This movie was going to be Bakshi's magnum opus. It was everything that the movies back then were lacking. It was going to be this genre-busting and adult-oriented descent into illustrated madness. And as surprising as it may be, Paramount Pictures said yes. In 1988, Who Framed Roger Rabbit exploded onto the scene, which gave everyone hope that animation could be a big business again, even when it's mixed with live action. Everyone wanted to capture that lightning for themselves, and Paramount, who were eager to cash in on that, saw gold in Bakshi's demented vision. So they greenlit the whole project, hoping that they would be getting something equally as impactful as Roger Rabbit while being completely anti-Roger Rabbit. In fact, the movie was even marketed as that, anti-Roger Rabbit. But after hyping up the project so much internally and agreeing to the project wholeheartedly, the studio nerves started to kick in. When the pre-production of the movie began, the horror-centric tone of the movie started to rattle some cages. Studio execs and the test audience didn't like the grotesque designs and mature themes at all. The animated sex, animated violence, and even animated birth shown on screen were not safe or mainstream at all. The movie started to seem more and more, well, for the lack of a better word, deranged. The line between edgy and unmarketable was completely thin, and all of these were not at all good things for Paramount Studios. Paramount Studios already had a lot of misfires before this movie came into the picture. They were tired of the financial burn of the misfires, and they just didn't want to get too cocky with their ambitions. So, understandably, they started to second-guess their investment completely. They started reconsidering everything. And I mean everything. They decided that they no longer wanted the movie to be pushed hard into an R-rated movie, because Roger Rabbit didn't lean fully into the R ratings, so why should this? So after dilly-dallying for a while, Paramount made a decision that would completely change everything for Cool World. Instead of canceling the project altogether, they started to reshape it. And that too, without informing Bakshi. Yep, that's right folks. They hired Michael Grace and Mark Victor, the duo behind Poltergeist, without even telling Bakshi about it. Paramount also eventually hired Larry Gross and added him to the team. Why, you ask? Well, the answer is quite simple. They wanted to soften the entire story up. They wanted to wipe the slate clean and make it sanitized so that the mainstream audience could eat it up. So that meant no more half-human murder babies, no sexual politics, no animation as body horror themes. Every ounce of the dark and gritty themes of the story was taken out of it and turned into a safe fantasy story. A movie that could very well ride the coattails of Roger Rabbit and stay PG-13 friendly the entire time. And here is how it is so much worse. Not only did producer Frank Mancuso Jr. hire a new team of writers behind Bakshi's back, but they also didn't inform Bakshi about anything that they were doing. So instead of consulting him about these rewrites, or at least having him give some notes, they simply presented him with a brand new, squeaky clean script on the first day of production. So what started out as a magnum opus was now dumbed down to a teenage fantasy with a talking spider. And to say the reaction to finding that out was volcanic would be an understatement. Bakshi was not taking it at all. He looked at all of this as betrayal, and honestly, I can't blame him. If I were in his shoes, I'd feel the same way too. Bakshi apparently blew up on Mancuso Jr., and this is where the story becomes a bit murky. Some say he threw the script across the room. Others say that he physically attacked the producer. Bakshi, however, denied throwing punches, but he definitely went ballistic. This was a betrayal of everything he stood for as a filmmaker because he had spent years developing Cool World as a horror project. Now it barely had the bite. The new plot, which can best be described as a Frankenstein stitched together by a committee that had no idea what they wanted, barely made any sense. It was no longer this dark parable about creation and consequences. Instead, the story was all about Jack Deebs, a bland cartoonist who was pulled into an animated dimension he created. There he meant Hollywood, this cartoon femme fatale who wanted to sleep with a human so that she could cross over to the real world. This act may seem simple or juicy on the surface, but in this world, it was a forbidden act, for it could tip over the balance between the real and animated world. Brad Pitt is also a part of this movie, playing a human cop who lived in this cartoon realm, whose only job was to ensure no cartoon managed to sleep with a human, and vice versa. Make sense? No? Don't worry about it. You're not the only one. The story then got even weirder because this rewritten version forgot to clarify a lot of important things. There were no answers given to burning questions like whether humans could stay in Cool World, if doodles could die, or how time worked in this world as a whole. The film tried to answer a few of these questions, but none of the answers were given properly. You'll see Bakshi's name in the end credits, but his heart was no longer in the project anymore. Neither the story nor the characters were his. The themes of the movie were barely recognizable, and in his own words, directing this movie was more like going through the motions for him. And you can see that the project lacked heart when you watch it. But this is not where the tragedy ends. Michael Grass and Mark Victor actually had pretty decent momentum in Hollywood after the success of Poltergeist. But as you can guess, the story of them rewriting Bakshi's movie became public pretty soon. The moment everyone realized that their secret rewriting of the story resulted in the film being a critical disaster, the writer duo were no longer considered trustworthy. The entire industry started to avoid them, lest the same fate befall another project simply by their involvement. And Bakshi's reputation took a hit too. The animation fans knew what went down behind the scenes, but the general public did not. They assumed that Cool World was entirely his fault because his name was on the poster. He was still the director. Now, you could argue that the studio interference that Cool World faced is normal in Hollywood. And sure, studios do often interfere. But in the case of Cool World, this was not just interference, this was sabotage. Bakshi wanted to create a movie that would push animation into completely adult territory, full of daring storytelling and wild visuals. Even if it was dark and gritty, the vision was there. But instead, he ended up with a compromised product that pleased no one. And this project did not fail because of ego or anything. The studio literally killed Bakshi's bold idea simply because it could. It erased it, rewrote it, and then left the director with something he didn't want. And before you guys make the mistake of thinking this is how bad it gets, hold on to your horses. Let me tell you about the casting. Because, of course, Having your entire script ripped apart and swapped for a mediocre version of itself behind your back was not enough. Bakshi also came on set and found out that his entire cast had been swapped out. Originally, Cool World was going to have Drew Barrymore as Holly Wood, the seductive but feral cartoon, while young Brad Pitt played the role of Jack Deebs, the cartoonist who was caught between his own reality and creation. This kind of a pairing made perfect sense in Bakshi's twisted world. Barrymore had that rebellious energy right after her Poison Ivy role, and Pitt, despite not being a megastar, had that oomph about him that matched the surreal tone Bakshi wanted. But Paramount didn't want that. They wanted names that would bring audiences to their seats. And this is where Kim Basinger and Gabriel Byrne entered the picture. In what could be best described as a focus group panic, the studio forced Bakshi into accepting the A-list stars. Basinger was extremely famous owing to her work in Batman, and Byrne had enough dramatic gravitas to give the film some weight, at least theoretically. However, neither matched the vision that Bakshi had in mind, and they didn't even try to. Kim Basinger in particular had her own vision for Cool World, and this vision of hers was not going hand in hand with Bakshi's visuals at all. She wanted the film to be family-friendly. In fact, she wanted the film to be so family-friendly that it could be shown in a children's hospital, which honestly makes no sense. This film was supposed to be about this cartoon woman who wanted to seduce her way into the real world, and Basinger wanted to play this movie in oncology units. She insisted that Holly Wood, a character that's supposed to be cruel, sexual, and manic, needed to be softened. With that softening, she removed the one role that could have created a sense of danger in the film. Basinger wanted Holly to be sympathetic, when Holly is literally supposed to be pure chaos in heels. But since Basinger was in charge and the studio was more than happy to back her tone-deaf demands, the entire character got completely butchered. Holly ends up becoming this confused, motivated, but vaguely flirty character who pouts her way through exposition instead of being the one to spark off the entire plot with her insanity. On the other hand, Gabriel Byrne played Jack Deebs with a sleepy and disinterested energy. He was no longer this tormented creator. He was more like a mopey guy who somehow managed to get his hands on a magic pen. The incoherent speech did not help Byrne's performance at all. But it was clear that he was just as confused as the rest of us. Brad Pitt was now a detective in Cool World, and honestly, he was the only one who gave a grounded performance out of the bunch. Although later, even he admitted that he had no clue what was going on. This miscasting would not have been this fatal had the tone of the film been clearer, but it was not. Cool World did not know what it was. It teased violence, but never went the full way. It tiptoed around sexuality, but never fully embraced it. It introduced dark ideas, but never expanded on them, and instead buried them under slapstick gags and Looney Tunes sound effects. It's a classic case of wanting to appeal to everyone, only to end up appealing to no one. The kids didn't get it. Adults didn't like it. Animation fans were confused. The movie simply felt like a schizophrenic fever dream. You could have cartoon pitfalls one moment, and then you could have a romantic subplot next, only to end it all with noir narration in the span of 3 minutes or less. It wanted to be everything at once, and failed miserably at it. And I'd say the miscasting of the actors played a huge role in this downfall. You can't cast actors who don't understand the world they're in and then hope for the best results while you change the world every few takes. And remember, this movie was not a live-action movie. It was a live-action and animated movie. Animation's already hard enough under normal and ideal circumstances. So, as you can guess, it becomes damn near impossible when the director of your script is going against the studio and the script is going through changes on a daily basis, with no one having the slightest idea of what story they were trying to say. It sounds overwhelming, and that was the reality for the animators who were working on this movie. The team of talented artists were hired for this movie only to end up flying blind. Bakshi was demoralized with everything that went down with the studio, and the script was nowhere near finalized. So the direction for the animation was a surreal shrug. According to multiple behind-the-scenes accounts, Bakshi told everyone to do a scene that they felt would be funny. The animators had nothing to go on except vibes. Many of the animators were veterans of Bakshi's earlier films or indie animation circles as a whole. On one hand, it gave them the chance to be free and let their imaginations go wild. However, since there was no coherent narrative structure, all of those creative but wild sequences added onto one another and ended up becoming visual noise. So the end result was a film where the animated gags constantly distracted everyone from the plot. And on top of that, the animation style did not blend well with the live-action footage. While Roger Rabbit somehow managed to integrate animated characters with the help of well-lit and composed physical sets, Cool World chose to use blue screen technology, which had noticeably low production values written all over it. The actors often looked like they were standing in front of a Windows 95 screensaver, awkwardly miming to characters that were definitely not there. There's also a very jarring transition between the real world and Cool World, making the audience feel like they're constantly watching two different films at the same time, and none of them are better than the other. Cool World was supposed to be this chaotic alternate dimension, and visually it is, but not in a good way. It doesn't have vibrant, surreal architecture with clear spatial logic. Instead, we got collage-like backdrops that looked messy, as if buildings were wrapped around and melting into one another for no reason. The geography of the place wasn't consistent at all. It was imaginative, yes, but it was also incoherent, and distractingly so. This disorientation also increased as we saw characters appear and disappear at random. Frank Harris would simply cease to exist for a long stretch, while Jack Deebs drifted through badly composited alleyways. Holly would be a femme fatale one moment and a damsel in distress the next moment, with no explanation. We were introduced to many characters who were there simply for the visual gag, but then they were never seen again. It feels like you're channel surfing and forgot what you're looking for. And let's not even talk about the pacing. The rhythm of this film is completely broken. Scenes start and end with no resolution. Conversations drift off, and some sequences genuinely feel like they exist just to kill time until the next animated gag shows up. The whole film feels chaotic, and all of this chaos originated from the same root problem of not having a unifying vision. The horror story was gutted completely, and no clear direction replaced it. So everyone, animators, actors, and designers, felt it was necessary to fill in the blanks with their own best guesses. There was no direction and no concept. Ralph Bakshi's entire idea of creating this groundbreaking adult animation with psychological depth was completely ruined. And when the animation wrapped and the film was finally pieced together, there was only one way the studio could salvage it. They had to do an exceptionally great job at marketing it so that the movie reached all the right demographics. So by the time the movie finally made its way to the finish line, Paramount realized that they had a problem. Calling it a problem would be downplaying it because it was a catastrophe. The movie didn't make sense, and the tone was all over the place. The test audience didn't just dislike the movie, they were completely disturbed by it. But this is Hollywood, baby. So now they had to market the film as if it were not a chaotic mess. And understandably, Paramount Pictures decided to go big, because big marketing has always paid out, hasn't it? Their big idea? Creating a 75-foot-tall cutout of Hollywood. Yes, the cartoon femme fatale was erected next to the Hollywood sign. No, like really. The actual iconic white-lettered Hollywood sign on Mount Lee had a 6-story cartoon sex symbol draped over it for all of Los Angeles to see. She was like the Temu version of Looney Tunes' Jessica Rabbit. Paramount Pictures actually paid $27,000 to the city for that stunt, and then put another $27,000 to the Rodney King Cleanup Fund as a gesture of goodwill. In case you don't know, the Rodney King Cleanup was the most racially charged police brutality incident in American history. And now, our movie about interdimensional cartoon intercourse's marketing team was involved with that. Spectacular business decision, I must say. Unsurprisingly, none of the Los Angeles residents were thrilled about it. Protests erupted and lawsuits followed. People felt like the ad was sexually exploitative and tacky, while also violating the protected landmark's sanctity. The backlash was swift and brutal, resulting in the sign being taken down earlier than scheduled. But that was not all. Paramount had also thrown Cool World's visual branding everywhere. posters, magazines, and movie theaters. Everywhere you could think of, Cool World was there. And everywhere, the movie was marketed as this fun and edgy ride through a cartoon underworld. They were leaning heavily into Hollywood's sex appeal and the bad girl aesthetic to lure the teens and adults into the film. Thanks to the marketing, audiences showed up expecting a movie that did not even exist. They expected sexy noir and got nonsense. Teens went there expecting titillation and stimulation. Instead, they got metaphysical rules and really bad romance. Adults who went in hoping for satire ended up with Looney Tunes gags. The campaign screamed cool, edgy, hip, while the movie was none of that and completely narratively incomprehensible. The marketing ended up becoming another piece of Cool World's surreal puzzle, and when the movie finally hit the theaters, the public made their verdict very clear. It was a loud no thanks. When the movie finally premiered in 1992, fans were not excited or curious about it. They were extremely confused, and the theaters were well filled with mutterings of, "What the hell did I just watch?" The box office numbers weren't promising at all. The movie had an estimated budget of $25 to $30 million and ended up grossing barely over $14.1 million. This is a huge flop, and Paramount hid that real fast. There was no video push, no effort to save face or plan a sequel. They knew they had ruined everything, thrown gasoline on a dumpster fire, and now everything was burning, and there was nothing they could do about it. And critics didn't hold back on the movie at all. Roger Ebert called it surprisingly incompetent, and on Rotten Tomatoes, it stands at 4%. While on Metacritic, this movie stands at a 27 out of 100. Most reviewers agreed that this movie was a beautiful disaster. Everyone complained about how the movie was all style and no substance at all. This movie was just animation wrapped around a plot which barely made sense. Some fans noticed that this movie was trying to appeal to everyone and ended up failing. It was too raunchy for kids and too childish for adults. So who was this movie for? The most disappointed of the bunch has to be the animation aficionado, though. Who Framed Roger Rabbit set a new gold standard for live-action animation blending. So 4 years after that, when Cool World came out, it felt like nothing but a massive failure. Everything about this movie's animation was just bad. And don't think the actors were spared either. Brad Pitt didn't get much hate because he was still an up-and-coming star, but the critics didn't show the same grace to Gabriel Byrne. Byrne's performance was often described as disinterested and stiff, but that was still a lot better than the treatment Basinger got. She got a critical beating when the news of her softening her character became public. The blame was not theirs entirely, of course, but their names were still attached to the wreckage, and their actions played a role in the grand failure of the movie. And Ralph Bakshi, as the director, got the brunt of the failure. Most people saw his name and blamed him. This movie left a huge mark on his career. And just like that, Cool World was dead. But is anything ever really dead? Sure, the box office buried it and the critics completely eviscerated it, but that doesn't mean the fan base forgot about it. That's right. Somewhere, the movie was hailed by fans. Why? Simply because it was chaotic enough, weird enough, it ended up developing a cult following. Not like a Rocky Horror or Blade Runner level fandom, but just enough to make people consider the thought that maybe, just maybe, Cool World was not a failure. It was a flawed gem that almost meant something. They saw the world of Cool World as ugly beautiful. It was a graffiti mural next to a burning dumpster. There was something so beautiful, so unique about the chaos that they were seeing on screen that no one could look away from it. And then you had the soundtrack. David Bowie literally created the song Real Cool World for this movie. The song's moody, sensual, and cool. Everything the movie isn't. Honestly, the soundtrack of this movie slaps harder than it should. It's the 90s music capsule that even the critics could not deny. The music is really good. Cool World also had a video game for SNES and Sega Genesis, but it was too clunky and almost not playable. Even DC Comics published a prequel comic written by Bakshi himself, trying to bring back the original darkness. But none of them managed to make a dent. While whatever happened because of this movie or during this movie is interesting, What did not happen is much more important. Because of Cool World, Bakshi never returned to Hollywood ever again. He saw how toxic it was and chose to return to television instead. It's heartbreaking, but also poignant at the same time. His comeback ended up becoming his curtain call. But still, that doesn't stop the fans from dissecting the movie to this day. There are several blog posts discussing whether Holly was a misunderstood icon or an over-sexualized mascot. They argue over what's hidden under the surface of the Cool World and how there's something there that is worth coming back to. Marvelous verdict. So what happened to Cool World? Short answer, it burned in flames because of studio interference. It started out with one plan, only to be completely changed by the studio into something a lot worse. Everyone's wishes, except the director's, were valued, and that's what ruined the film. The critics hated it, and the audience ignored it. And perhaps that is why the movie lives on. It's a cautionary tale of what happens when bad management meets big ambitions. And in that kind of a messed up way, I would say this movie is kinda cool. Let us know what you guys think about Cool World and all the drama that went down behind the scenes in the comments down below. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye!